The spotlight of hip-hop fame doesn't always fade under stage lights. Sometimes it ends behind prison bars. In recent years, several of rap's biggest names have found themselves entangled in the criminal justice system, serving sentences that range from a few years to decades. These high-profile cases have shaken the industry, ended careers, and left fans asking the same question: how did it come to this? One of the most shocking stories begins with a man who once ruled the music business, Sean Combs. Known over the years as Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, and simply Diddy, Combs spent more than 3 decades building a powerful legacy in entertainment. Today, however, the name appearing on federal paperwork is inmate Sean Combs, reportedly housed at FCI Fort Dix in New Jersey, and serving a federal sentence. To understand how things reached this point, you have to go back to the beginning. In the early 1990s, Combs founded Bad Boy Records, a label that quickly became one of hip-hop's most influential forces. He helped launch the career of the notorious B.I.G., produced chart-topping hits, expanded into fashion with Sean John, and even turned Ciroc Vodka into a global brand. For nearly 3 decades, Diddy wasn't just a rap mogul, was one of the most recognizable and powerful figures in the entire entertainment industry. But behind the glamorous white parties, magazine covers, billion-dollar deals, and celebrity friendships, a different story was quietly unfolding. It was a story that would take years, nearly decades, before the public would begin to hear it. Starting in 2017, multiple civil lawsuits were filed against Combs, setting the stage for a legal battle that would dramatically change his legacy. He has been accused of sexually assaulting 3 men, of committing sexual misconduct against a former male employee, and of drugging and assaulting a woman. Now, civil lawsuits are one thing. People file them every day. But this situation escalated in a way nobody expected. In November 2023, Cassandra Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend, filed a lawsuit against him. That filing included allegations that sent shockwaves throughout the entire music industry. Within a day, the lawsuit was settled, but the impact had already taken hold. The floodgates opened. More accusers stepped forward. More lawsuits followed. And then in 2024, something happened that permanently shifted the trajectory of this story. A 2016 surveillance video surfaced, appearing to show Combs in a physical altercation with Ventura in a hotel hallway. The footage spread across every platform. Millions of people viewed it. There was little room for interpretation. There was no narrative that could erase what viewers believed they were seeing. Federal investigators had reportedly been building a case. And in September 2024, Diddy was arrested by Homeland Security investigations in New York City. The charges included racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and violations of the Mann Act. He was processed. He was denied bail. During his arraignment on September 17th, Combs pleaded not guilty. Judge Robin Tarnowski denied Combs bail and ordered that the defendant remain in federal custody. The following day, U.S. District Court Judge Andrew L. Carter Jr. rejected the defense's appeal for bail, citing concerns about potential witness intimidation. Now, here's where things take another turn. Diddy's legal team argued that the 2016 surveillance clip stemmed from what they described as a long-term relationship that ultimately ended due to Ventura's concerns over the defendant's infidelity. The judge was not persuaded. The judge did not accept that claim, at one point asking, "What does love have to do with it?" While Combs remained in custody, the federal government moved forward with trial preparations. The world watched closely. Social media lit up with theories, memes, and heated debates. Another wave of reactions came in the form of viral jokes, including references to baby oil and surviving Diddy parties. The case turned into a cultural spectacle before the trial had even officially begun. The trial started on May 5th, 2025, in Federal District Court in Lower Manhattan before Judge Arun Subramanian. Prosecutors called witness after witness. During testimony, heavy drug use at the rapper's so-called freak-off parties was described in detail. According to court proceedings, he, his girlfriends, and hired male escorts allegedly used substances such as ecstasy, GHB, and other drugs during extended gatherings that sometimes lasted for days. The prosecution built its case around the argument that Combs uses power, fame, and wealth to manipulate and exploit individuals over a period of years. They introduced testimony from multiple accusers. They played audio recordings. They showed the hotel surveillance video again, this time to the jury. The defense pushed back aggressively. They argued that all interactions were consensual, that Combs was a successful businessman being unfairly targeted, and that the government was overstepping its authority. In June 2025, prosecutors agreed to drop 3 charges related to arson, attempted kidnapping, and aiding sex trafficking.
That development suggested the government's case may not have been equally strong on every count. Then came the verdict. On July 2nd, 2025, after 3 days of deliberations, the jury found Combs not guilty of racketeering conspiracy and not guilty of sex trafficking charges involving Ventura and another unidentified woman. He was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purpose of prostitution involving Ventura, another former girlfriend, and male sex workers. Those convictions carry a maximum possible sentence of 20 years in prison. Let that sink in. The racketeering charge is not guilty. The sex trafficking charge is not guilty. But the Mann Act charges, related to transporting individuals across state lines for illegal sexual activity, guilty on 2 counts. It was a split verdict that gave both sides something to point to. Prosecutors announced they would seek a sentence of at least 51 months, or 4.25 years. When sentencing day arrived on October 3rd, 2025, Judge Arun Subramanian sentenced Combs to 4 years and 2 months in federal prison and fined him $500,000. The sentence was widely viewed as relatively lenient considering the scope of the original charges. But the legal battle is far from over. Combs' legal team, now led by appellate attorney Alexander Shapiro, has launched an aggressive appeal. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals approved an expedited review, shortening a process that typically takes years into a matter of months. Oral arguments are scheduled for April 9th, 2026, before a 3-judge panel. The appeal focuses on 2 primary arguments. First, that the 50-month sentence is excessive and unusual for Mann Act convictions of this type. Second, that the trial court made legal errors in interpreting the jury's findings and may have improperly considered conduct for which Combs had been acquitted when determining the sentence. Meanwhile, during his time in federal prison, Combs has reportedly remained active. He spends part of his days working in the prison chapel library and has enrolled in the Residential Drug Abuse Program, known as RDAP, which can reduce an inmate sentence by up to 1 year upon successful completion. Early reports suggest that participation in the program could potentially work in his favor. Combs' release date was moved up by more than 5 weeks, with him now expected to return home on April 25, 2028. However, the journey hasn't been without challenges. Following an alleged violation of prison rules at a federal correctional institution at Fort Dix in New Jersey, his projected release was at one point pushed back to June 2028 before later being adjusted forward again. Outside the prison walls, the Combs empire appears to be in free fall. Netflix released Sean Coates, The Reckoning, produced by longtime rival 50 Cent, which Combs' legal team described as a biased hit piece. His sons, Justin and Christian Combs, announced a documentary series on Zeus Network in December 2025, promising to share their family's perspective on the fallout. And there could be additional legal trouble ahead. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has confirmed it opened an investigation into allegations of a 2020 sexual battery involving Combs and a music producer. If charges were filed and if Combs were to be convicted in California, he could potentially face additional time in state prison. Once his East Coast sentence concludes in 2028, there will even be an effort to seek relief at the highest level. On October 7, 2025, Donald Trump confirmed that Combs had requested a presidential pardon. For now, Diddy remains in a low-security federal prison in New Jersey, serving a 50-month sentence. His appeal is scheduled for April 2026. His projected release date, if no further changes occur, is April 25, 2028. The man who once appeared on the cover of Forbes, who hosted some of the most talked-about events in entertainment, and who helped shape the sound and style of a generation, is now wearing a prison uniform and working in a chapel library. 50 months, that's Diddy's number. But compared to the next figure on this list, 50 months is minor. If Diddy represented the face of East Coast hip-hop excess, then Suge Knight was often viewed as a West Coast counterpart with a reputation built on fear and intimidation that made others in the industry seem restrained by comparison. The partnership between Tupac and Death Row produced some of the most iconic music in hip-hop history. All Ears on Me, California Love, and the East Coast-West Coast rivalry permeated the entire genre. And Suge Knight was at the center of it all. Then came September 7th, 1996, in Las Vegas. Knight was driving the car in which Tupac Shakur was shot that night. Knight himself was struck by bullet fragments. Tupac died 6 days later. The music industry lost one of its most powerful voices, and it marked the beginning of the end for Death Row Records. After Tupac's death, things began to unravel for Knight. On October 22, 1996, he was taken into custody pending a hearing related to a probation violation stemming from an incident on September 7, 1996, when Knight and members of his death row entourage, including Tupac Shakur, were involved in an altercation with Orlando Anderson, an alleged Crips gang member. On February 28, 1997, Knight was sentenced to 9 years in prison for that probation violation. He was released early, walking out of FCI Sheridan on August 6, 2001. But the freedom didn't last. In 2003, Knight returned to prison for 10 months after violating parole in connection with an incident involving a parking lot attendant and alleged gang association in 2002. It became a cycle of legal troubles, release, and then more legal troubles. Meanwhile, the money from death row was drying up. The label's income declined sharply during Knight's repeated incarcerations, and it eventually filed for bankruptcy. But the incident that would define the rest of Suge Knight's life happened on January 29, 2015, and it unfolded at a burger stand. Prosecutors later alleged he was upset after being turned away from a meeting earlier that day with Dr. Dre and Ice Cube regarding the film Straight Outta Compton. The Straight Outta Compton biopic was in production, telling the story of NWA, the very group that Knight had once worked with while building Death Row Records. But by 2015, the relationships between Knight and members of NWA had significantly deteriorated. The former Death Row CEO was later charged with murder after driving his vehicle into 2 men in a Los Angeles restaurant parking lot. In January 2015, Knight struck local businessman Terry Carter, claiming he had been violently ambushed and was attempting to flee for his safety. Carter died from his injuries. The second man, Cleve Bone Sloan, sustained injuries to his head and foot. The entire confrontation was captured on surveillance video. The incident occurred near a filming location connected to a promotional shoot for Straight Outta Compton. Knight reportedly left the scene before authorities arrived. He was later arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder charges that carried the possibility of a life sentence. The case stretched on for years. Knight remained in jail as his health reportedly declined. Attorneys joined and left his defense team. The courtroom drama rivaled anything from his music industry career. At one point, 2 of Knight's former attorneys were indicted on suspicion of attempting to bribe potential witnesses. Prosecutors alleged they tried to orchestrate testimony suggesting there were firearms present at the scene to support Knight's self-defense claim. After years of delays, court hearings, medical incidents, and legal battles, Knight ultimately reached a plea agreement. In 2018, Suge Knight pleaded no contest of voluntary manslaughter related to the vehicular incident. He entered the plea just 2 weeks before a scheduled trial on murder and attempted murder charges that could have resulted in a life sentence if he had been convicted. The judge sentenced Suge Knight to 28 years in prison, 22 years for running over the victim, and an additional 6 years as a third strike under California's 3 strikes law. In California, the maximum sentence for voluntary manslaughter is 11 years, but Knight's prior convictions double the penalty. He faced another 5 years because a conviction qualifies as a serious and violent felony, plus 1 extra year for the deadly weapon allegation involving the truck. 28 years for a man who was already 53 at sentencing. Probation was not an option. Knight is required to serve at least 23 years before eligibility for parole, which comes in October 2034. When he will be 69 years old. Terry Carter's family voiced their feelings in court. Your unrepentant, unremorseful, callous, unashamed actions took my dad's life away, Carter's daughter told Knight during the sentencing hearing. Outside court, Carter's widow said, I really don't want him to ever leave jail. Knight attempted to appeal the sentence. In March, his bid to overturn the 28-year term was denied. The co-founder of Death Row Records had filed the appeal in 2023, but the judge ruled that it was filed too late. Rolling Stone reported the judge considered the filing insincere, although Knight's attorney attributed the delay to the COVID-19 pandemic and Knight's health issues, including significant vision loss in one eye since incarceration. Knight reportedly told the court that he expects to die in prison. Currently, Knight is serving his sentence at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility. He once sat front row at award shows with Tupac Shakur, whose label included Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and who was once called the most feared man in hip-hop is now behind bars. That man is now 60 years old, has lost sight in one eye, and faces 28 years behind bars. On top of that, a judge affirmed a $107 million judgment against him. A $107 million judgment was upheld against the imprisoned former rap mogul Suge Knight in Death Row Records. From the peak of hip-hop fame to a prison cell in San Diego, that is a story of Suge Knight. 28 years, one of the longest sentences ever handed to a figure in hip-hop. But while Knight served his time in California, another rapper's legal saga unfolded in real time for the world to witness. Over the course of 2.5 years, the trial of Young Thug, born Jeffrey Lamar Williams, became more than a criminal case. It turned into a spectacle. It became the longest trial in Georgia history, was live-streamed, and generated memes, debates, and legal commentary from people who had never followed a courtroom before. The case forced the music industry to confront a long-standing question: where does the music end and alleged gang activity begin? Young Thug did not come from privilege. He grew up in the Jonesboro South Projects in Atlanta, one of the city's roughest neighborhoods. He began rapping in the early 2010s and quickly drew attention with a style unlike anything hip-hop had heard before. His voice was unconventional, his flow unpredictable, and his fashion boundary pushing. Songs like Stoner, Best Friend, and Lifestyle cemented his place as one of the most influential artists of his generation. By 2022, Young Thug had reached the top. He founded YSL Records, which stood for Young Stoner Life. The label released successful projects and signed artists like Gunna, who himself became a star. Young Thug had collaborated with everyone from Drake to Travis Scott to Camila Cabello. His influence on modern rap was undeniable. Then, on May 9, 2022, everything changed. At 33, Young Thug was jailed following his arrest on charges related to allegedly leading a street gang called Young Slime Life, YSL, whose members were accused of violent and illegal acts, including murder, armed robbery, drug dealing, and carjacking. He was one of 28 people named in a 56-count indictment that included violations of Georgia's RICO Act and participation in criminal street gang activity. The prosecution was led by Fani Willis, who argued that Young Thug and his associates operated as a street gang with ties to the National Bloods. The defense disputed this characterization. Attorneys argued YSL is a record label, not a gang. Lawyer Brian Steele claimed the YSL name actually stood for Yves Saint Laurent, referencing the group's fashion style, while explaining that Thug and Young Thug represented truly humble under God. The charges included conspiracy to violate RICO, 2 counts of participation in criminal street gang activity, 3 counts under the Georgia-Controlled Substances Act, possession of a firearm during a felony, and possession of a machine gun. Prosecutors alleged that Young Thug led YSL and directed or knew about violent crimes committed by its members. They sought to link him to the 2015 fatal shooting of a rival gang member, claiming he had rented the car used in the killing. The trial itself was an odyssey. Jury selection for Young Thug's case began in January 2023. By the time opening statements started in November after months of delays caused by some defendants taking plea deals and others choosing separate trial sheets, was one of 6 co-defendants. Consider that jury selection alone took nearly a year. Setting a record for Georgia during the trial, events unfolded that seemed pulled straight from a TV drama. From a defendant allegedly attempting to pass drugs and open court accusations that Young Thug was sending messages to his girlfriend, Mariah the Scientist. Through his attire, social media coverage never paused point one by one. Co-defendant began taking plea deals. On December 14th, Gunna was released after pleading guilty to a single count of racketeering. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and 500 hours of community service, with the first year credited as time served and the remaining 4 years suspended under probation conditions. Following his release, some fellow rappers and social media users accused him of snitching on Young Thug to secure his freedom. As the trial continued through 2024, pressure mounted. The sudden wave of plea deals may have been influenced by the looming possibility of a mistrial. That risk emerged after a new witness, rapper Slime Life Shorty, took the stand to identify others involved based on social media posts. While reading a caption from one exhibit, the witness accidentally read an unredacted version instead of the redacted copy on the monitor. The unredacted version contained the hashtag Frequa, which was inadvertently read aloud to the jury.